The file he slid across the marble table wasn't the final paperwork for our daughter, the one we were supposed to bring home in the morning. It was a divorce settlement. His voice was chillingly calm as he said the words that would burn themselves into my memory forever. My family's legacy requires an heir. Sarah, not a charity case. In that moment, the perfect life we had built wasn't just broken, it was revealed to be a masterpiece of deceit, and I was the final discarded brushstroke. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back, be part of the experience. If a moment grabs your attention, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp of that scene and share your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments resonate with you the most. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. My name is Sarah, and I once believed my life was a carefully curated masterpiece. I stood in the main hall of the city's Contemporary Art Museum, a space I knew intimately as I had curated the very exhibit surrounding us. The low hum of polite conversation was a familiar melody, a soundtrack to a life lived in the public eye. My husband, Richard, had his hand placed lightly on the small of my back, a gesture that looked supportive to the cameras but felt like a brand, a claim of ownership. He was a man sculpted for success, with a smile that could win elections and a family name that opened every door. He was speaking to a major donor, his voice smooth and confident as he spoke of our future, of expanding our family. He mentioned the daughter we were set to officially adopt the next day, and the donor's wife clasped my hand, her eyes shining with warmth. I smiled back, a practiced, perfect curve of my lips, playing my part as the devoted, accomplished wife of a rising political star. Everything was an immaculate performance. Across the room, I met the gaze of Richard's mother, Eleanor. She was the family's silent matriarch, a woman whose influence was felt in every room she entered. Though she rarely spoke above a whisper, she looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw none of the celebratory joy that filled the room. Instead, I saw a profound, chilling pity, a look of solemn sympathy that a doctor might give before delivering a terminal diagnosis. It was a look that said she knew a truth I was hours away from discovering, a secret that would shatter the beautiful frame of my life. The ride home was quiet, a stark contrast to the noise of the gala. Richard stared out the window of the town car, the city lights flashing across his stoic profile. I attributed his silence to exhaustion, the come down after a long evening of performance. We lived in a penthouse that overlooked the entire city, a glass cage of success, and as the heavy door clicked shut behind us, the silence inside was absolute. It was then that the final act of his performance fell away, revealing the stranger I had married. He didn't look at me as he walked to the marble island in our kitchen. He placed a thick, leather-bound folder on the counter, its presence ominous and cold. I expected to see the final adoption papers for Lily, the little 7-year-old girl whose drawings were already taped to our refrigerator, the girl we were supposed to bring home in the morning. But the document he slid across the polished stone was not for our daughter. It was a divorce settlement, meticulously prepared and legally binding. His voice was devoid of all emotion, as if he were discussing a business merger that had fallen through. "I can't do this, Sarah," he said. The words hung in the sterile air between us. "My family's legacy requires an heir, not a charity case." The phrase hit me with physical force, stealing the air from my lungs. He explained, with the cold logic of a political strategist, that adopting a child with an unknown background was a liability he could not afford. It was a crack in the perfect facade, a potential weakness his opponents could exploit. He spoke of his lineage, of his duty, of a future that apparently had no room for me or the child we had promised to love. I finally understood that in his calculated world, our daughter, our sweet Lily, was nothing more than a variable in a political equation, one that he had decided to eliminate. My shock turned to ice in my veins when I realized the depth of his betrayal. I asked him about the lawyer, about the final calls he had supposedly been making all week to finalize the adoption. He had the decency to finally look at me then, but there was no remorse in his eyes. only the weary impatience of a man concluding an unpleasant task. He admitted he had never submitted the final paperwork. For 2 weeks, he had been performing, creating a fiction of progress while his personal attorneys worked in the shadows to dissolve our marriage and dismantle the adoption. This wasn't a sudden change of heart. It was a conspiracy against the life I thought we were building together. In that moment, the perfect life we had built wasn't just broken, it was revealed to be a masterpiece of deceit. And I was the final, discarded brushstroke. In the days that followed, I moved through a fog of grief and disbelief. The world Richard had built for me crumbled, and I was left in the rubble. He was generous in his severance, providing me with a financial settlement that was designed to ensure my silence. He wanted a quiet, clean exit, one that wouldn't tarnish his public image. But the money felt like blood money, payment for the theft of my future. I left the penthouse with only my personal belongings and the small portfolio of Lily's drawings she had given me during our visits. My first call was to the adoption agency, my voice trembling as I tried to explain the impossible. They were sympathetic but firm. The placement was approved for a stable, two-parent home. My sudden divorce and single status changed everything. The case was closed. I had lost my husband and my daughter in the same breath. The ensuing months were a blur of lawyers and boxes, of dismantling a life I had mistaken for my own. I found a small two-bedroom apartment in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, a world away from the cold glamour of my previous life. It was a space I filled with books and art, things that were truly mine. And in the quiet moments, when the grief threatened to overwhelm me, I would look at Lily's drawings. They were filled with dark forests and hidden creatures. But in every single one, there was a tiny, resilient flower pushing its way through the shadows. I saw myself in that flower. Fueled by a resolve I didn't know I possessed, I walked into a different social services agency. I filled out the paperwork to become a foster parent. And eventually, to adopt as a single mother, I told the social worker my story. And she listened with a compassionate gaze. She warned me the process would be difficult, that the system favored couples. But when she saw the quiet determination in my eyes, she handed me a binder filled with profiles of children waiting for a home. I turned the pages slowly, looking at the smiling, hopeful faces of so many children. And then I saw her. It was Lily. Her case had been transferred, and her file now noted that the previous adoption arrangement had fallen through due to unforeseen circumstances. Her biography was the same: a quiet 7-year-old who loved to draw but had trouble trusting adults after being moved between homes. Seeing her face again felt like a sign, a second chance I couldn't ignore. I knew it would be a battle, but it was one I was now ready to fight. The fight to adopt Lily on my own was arduous. Richard's name was still on the original paperwork, a ghost haunting the process. His lawyers sent polite but firm letters expressing his well wishes, but formally withdrawing any connection to the case. It was a legal maneuver to distance himself completely. The agency scrutinized my finances, my living situation, my emotional stability. I poured all my energy into proving that a home built on love was more stable than a mansion built on lies. And after 6 long, grueling months, I won. The day I brought Lily home was quiet and gentle. There were no cameras, no donors, no public spectacle. It was just the two of us. Her room was painted a soft yellow, and her drawings were already framed and hung on the walls. She walked in, clutching a worn-out backpack, her eyes taking in everything. She didn't speak much at first. Her language was art. She would spend hours at the small desk I had set up for her, her crayons and pencils telling me the stories she couldn't yet voice. I learned to understand her through her art. When she drew storms over a tiny house, I knew she was feeling anxious. When she drew gardens filled with towering, protective trees, I knew she was starting to feel safe. Our conversations happened over sheets of paper, as I would sit beside her and draw my own pictures in response. We built our trust, our bond, one crayon stroke at a time. Slowly, the dark forests in her drawings began to recede, replaced by sunny fields. The monsters became smaller, less threatening. One evening, about a year after she came home, she was sitting at the kitchen table while I made dinner. She had been quietly drawing, and when I looked over, I saw she had drawn 2 figures holding hands under a brightly shining sun. It was the first time she had drawn people. She looked up at me, a small, hesitant smile on her face, and said, "That's you, and that's me." A few weeks later, she called me Mom for the first time, the word so soft I almost missed it. In that small apartment, with our shared language of art, we were healing. We were building our own masterpiece, one of quiet, resilient love. Just as our lives settled into a peaceful rhythm, Richard reappeared. His political campaign had faltered. Without the perfect wife and the heartwarming adoption story, his family values platform rang hollow. He lost the primary election, a humiliating public defeat. His first attempt at contact was an email, a carefully worded message about his deep regret and his hope that I was thriving. I deleted it without a response, but he was persistent. He didn't resort to the overt stalking I had read about in other stories. His methods were more insidious, more suited to his nature. He began a quiet campaign of professional sabotage. A major donation to the museum was mysteriously withdrawn right after I was announced as the lead curator on the project. Rumors began to circulate among the board members about my emotional fragility following our divorce. They were whispers, impossible to trace back to him. But I knew his fingerprints were all over them. He was trying to dismantle the one part of my life I had managed to keep for myself, my career. The final chilling move came through the mail. It was a plain manila envelope with no return address. Inside was a high-quality photograph, not of me, but of Lily. It was taken from a distance, showing her playing on the swings in her schoolyard, her face bright with laughter. She looked happy and carefree, but the photo felt like a violation, a threat. Tucked into the corner of the envelope was a small embossed card from a high-end public relations firm with a handwritten note. A beautiful work of art is so easily damaged. Perhaps it's time we discussed a new arrangement. He wasn't trying to get me back. He was trying to control me, to remind me that he still held power, that he could reach into my world and spoil it whenever he chose. That photograph was a declaration of war. I knew I couldn't fight Richard in his arena of backroom deals and anonymous whispers. The legal system would be a long, draining battle, and his wealth could keep me tied up in court for years. He expected me to be scared, to retreat, to negotiate. He underestimated me. He had forgotten that as a curator. My expertise was in telling stories through carefully chosen objects and putting them on display for the world to see. I decided to curate one final exhibit, The Truth. His last-ditch effort to save his reputation was a nationally televised interview, a carefully staged piece of political theater. I watched him on the screen, his face a mask of practiced sorrow as he spoke of his painful divorce and his lost dream of fatherhood. He painted himself as the victim, a man whose life had been derailed. He never mentioned Lily by name, but he spoke of a child he had hoped to call his own, implying I had somehow taken that from him. It was a masterful performance, designed to win back the public's sympathy, and it was my opening. I made one phone call, not to a lawyer, but to his mother. Eleanor and I had not spoken since the day she gave me that look of pity. My request was simple and audacious. I told her I would be attending her family's annual foundation gala, an exclusive event for the city's elite, and I asked for 5 minutes on the main stage. There was a long silence on the line. I didn't threaten or plead. I simply stated that the story of her son's character was incomplete and I had the missing pieces. I think, in her own way, she was a curator of her family's legacy too, and she knew when a piece no longer belonged in the collection. She agreed. The night of the gala, Lily held my hand, her small fingers laced tightly with mine. She wore a simple blue dress and clutched her favorite sketchbook to her chest. As we walked into the grand ballroom, a hush fell over the crowd, heads turned, and whispers followed us like the train of a gown. We were an unexpected exhibit. Richard was on stage in the middle of a speech about family, integrity, and second chances. He froze when he saw us, his well-rehearsed words dying on his lips. As he faltered, his mother, Eleanor, did something no one expected. She stood up from her seat at the head table and walked gracefully onto the stage. She took the microphone from her stunned son's hand. Her voice was quiet but carried through the silent hall. A legacy is not about bloodlines. Richard, she said, her gaze fixed on him. It is about the truth we build with our actions. She then turned to me. Sarah has something to share. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I walked to the podium and connected my tablet to the large projector screens that flanked the stage. Then, one by one, I showed them Lily's art. The first images were the ones from her case file, chaotic. Dark forests, filled with shadowy figures and cage-like trees. The room was utterly silent, captivated by the raw, unspoken pain in a child's drawings. Then came the drawings from our first year together, a tiny house under a stormy sky, a lone flower blooming in a crack in the pavement. Finally, I showed them her most recent work. The forests were now open and sunny. The house was bright, with smoke curling from the chimney. And the last image, the one that filled the entire screen, was the one she had drawn at our kitchen table, two figures, a woman and a small girl, holding hands under a radiant, smiling sun. I let the image hang in the silence. The story was there for everyone to see, a story of fear, of healing, of love, a story that no lie could ever erase. Richard stood there, exposed and diminished, not by an accusation, but by the undeniable truth in his daughter's art. The fallout from that night was quiet but absolute. There was no explosive scandal, no dramatic headline. It was something far more damning, a silent, collective judgment. Richard's political career was over, not with a bang, but with the quiet closing of doors. Donors pulled their funding, and his party distanced itself from him. His masterpiece of deceit had been unveiled, and all that was left was an empty frame. He had built his life on a curated image, and when that image was replaced by the truth, he had nothing left. Eleanor and I never spoke of that night again, but a week later, a package arrived for Lily. It contained the finest set of professional-grade art supplies I had ever seen, with a simple, unsigned card that read, "For the true artist." It was Eleanor's way of acknowledging the real legacy. We weren't friends, but we had reached a place of mutual, silent respect. My life with Lily settled back into its peaceful rhythm, but something had fundamentally changed. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. One evening, Lily and I were cleaning the kitchen when she accidentally knocked a small ceramic vase off the counter. It shattered on the floor. My first instinct was to sweep up the pieces and throw them away, to erase the imperfection. But Lily stopped me. She gathered the larger pieces carefully and then looked up at me, her eyes thoughtful. "Can we fix it, Mom?" she asked. "We can make it a kintsugi." It was a word I had taught her myself. I had told her about the Japanese art of mending broken pottery with lacquer mixed with powdered gold. The philosophy that breakage and repair are part of an object's history, not something to hide. We spent the rest of the evening at the kitchen table, painstakingly gluing the pieces of the vase back together. Lily, with her steady artist's hands, then traced the cracks with gold paint from her new art set. When we finished, the little vase was whole again, but it was not the same. It was more beautiful. A network of shimmering gold lines ran across its surface, telling the story of its fall and its recovery. As I looked at it, I finally understood. My life, our family, had not been ruined by being broken. We were a work of kintsugi. We were stronger and more beautiful, not in spite of our scars. But because of them, the true masterpieces are not the ones that are perfect and untouched, but the ones that have been shattered and put back together with love, their history shining like gold.